Now, in this video, I want to discuss a few different things. Most of them are basically going to be centered around the Jedi and their code that does not allow them to have attachments, which is something that many Star Wars fans don't like or don't agree with or think is what led to their downfall, since it forced Anakin to hide his relationship with Padme, and, well, we all know how that went. And in relation to this, we'll then be talking about the character of Mara Jade, her relationship with Luke Skywalker that we got in the Star Wars Expanded Universe, why George Lucas apparently hated Mara Jade, and what could be done with her in the new canon to perhaps fix a few things. Okay, so we have to start out by discussing why the Jedi Order forbid attachments in the first place, when, as rightfully said by Anakin in Episode 2, the Jedi are all about compassion. It's central to their way of life, and that compassion is essentially unconditional love, basically meaning they care about the well-being of, well, pretty much everyone, that they exist to serve the greater good or to see a balance maintained in the galaxy so that everyone can live free and peacefully and as they see fit, more or less. And in order to serve this greater good, the Jedi, who you could say are blessed with abilities by the Force, are completely selfless and never ever put themselves or their own wants and or desires ahead of anything else. They never use the Force for their own personal advantage or gain. That's instead what the Sith do. They're the ones who are completely and utterly selfish and always put themselves first and use the Force to accomplish what they want, not caring about the free will of others, which causes imbalance, because almost always the Sith actively seek to rule over others, which relates back to one of their greatest fears, that being the fear of not having power and or control. In fact, Sith live in a constant state of fear because they're always worried about who will try to take what they have or what happens if they lose their power, which, as Yoda said,
"Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering."
Basically, they get to the point where they have nothing left to gain and only everything to lose. While on the other hand, the Jedi know joy because, as George Lucas himself has put it, they live a life where they have nothing to lose and everything to gain. They never have to fear losing anything since they deny themselves attachments, be they personal possessions or becoming too attached to an individual. This then means they will never put the self over the greater good because they have no personal stake in pretty much anything. There is nothing they want or have to worry about other than, again, that greater good. So they can always choose what's the best course of action for it, which again leads to a profound sense of joy and or contentment with their life. However, the usual argument against this is that this is some type of awful and punishing or restrictive way to live, that all they do is deny themselves the things they want, and they're secretly miserable because they have nothing and no one, which is actually a very Western and or materialistic or consumerist way of looking at life, that we should judge ourselves on what we have and who loves us, not simply on what we actually do with our life and who we help and who we love. It should also be noted here that Jedi are very much allowed to have friends and that they do not deny their emotions, which is a commonly held belief for some reason, that they're supposed to be like Vulcans from Star Trek or something and purge all their emotions, when in reality they just don't let themselves be ruled by those emotions. And again, they are encouraged to love. It's a central part of their life, which I think leads one to ask the question, if Jedi can have friends, which you could argue is one step away from an intimate relationship with someone, and then a lot of people, most people I hope, would help their friends if they could and any way they could, would it then be such a bad idea for the Jedi to take that next step, to truly love someone and to get married and have children and all that good stuff, just like Mara Jade and Luke did in the Expanded Universe? And before even tackling that, a couple things should be noted. The first of which is that the Jedi are meant to be an ideal, right? They are meant to be the epitome of selflessness and self-sacrifice and service in an overtly fictional story about good versus evil. And if you want to look at them in just that context of a story meant to perhaps teach us some values, I'm actually fine with the no attachment thing. It makes sense and it works in the story. The Jedi and some of their beliefs or ways of being or living, and how they treat others or their compassion for all, are things we can strive to be more like, but not something we're meant to ever perfectly replicate. Heck, the Jedi exist so that others can have choices in their life and to live and laugh and love and all that good stuff I talked about before. They don't want everyone to be like them. Not that everyone or most people even could be like the Jedi. Simply put, by and large, the Jedi are an example of how we can be better to each other, how people trying to be a little less selfish and consumed with themselves could make the world a better place. The other thing worth quickly noting is that the Luke and Mara Jade relationship came about and bloomed before the prequels were ever a thing, before we even knew the Jedi didn't allow attachments, before we learned all about it in those films. And just looking at the original trilogy, the idea that Jedi would fall in love and marry and all of that seems like an easy assumption to make, actually, considering one of the things it centers around, that story centers around, is a father-son relationship. And never once in the original trilogy is it even hinted at that Anakin was not supposed to have children, that he had broken some sort of Jedi rule or code. And so I think most of us who remember Star Wars before the prequels, I think we assumed that Anakin had once loved and married and had children, but that something had gone horribly wrong. Something else, not that the relationship itself had been, you could say, what in many ways brought about his fall, but that whatever destroyed that relationship is what caused him to fall. And so keeping this in mind, it's kind of odd that George Lucas was okay with Luke and Mara Jade in the expanded universe in the first place, that he didn't say no to the idea outright of them falling in love and eventually getting married, unless of course he, A, didn't really care all that much about what happened in the expanded universe, or just didn't pay that much attention, and both of which could be the case considering it is something he always has said is separate from his Star Wars, that it is a different universe essentially. Or it could be that B, in the early 90s, when the Thrawn trilogy started, which began the Luke-Mara romance, he hadn't really come up with this idea of no attachments for the Jedi just yet, and saw no sort of issues then with Luke falling in love. However, since then, Lucas has gone on to say that he doesn't really like the character of Mara Jade because in his version of the sequels, or what happens after Return of the Jedi, Luke never got married and had kids, none of that would have happened, and though I very much respect George Lucas and his version of Star Wars, no surprise, and that I too, despite my love of the EU, have always seen it as something separate from his version, I do think there's an interesting story to be told with Luke falling in love and having a child of his own. I've even said before that what the sequel trilogy should have been was some sort of external threat to the Force itself, all the while Luke grapples with what the Jedi Order, the reborn Jedi Order, should look like, or what it should be like now. Should it continue with things like no attachments, or should it allow them, keeping in mind Anakin's relationship with Padme is what Palpatine exploited to turn him to the dark side, but it was also Anakin's love for his family, for his son, that Luke used to turn him back and save the galaxy by destroying the Emperor. And so this would be an interesting thing for Luke to have to come to terms with. Are attachments a strength or a weakness? And why do all Jedi have to forsake them when certainly some of them could and would put the greater good above those they love? And what better way for Luke to have to deal with all this and figure it all out than by including Mara Jade? And I think the new canon could still include Mara Jade, despite us knowing, as I've said many times before, that all roads lead to the sequel trilogy, and we know where Luke is at that point. He's someone who has abandoned his family and friends and doesn't seem to even care about the greater good anymore. And honestly, I'm not sure that seeing bad things in his nephew's head and almost making one bad decision would lead to all that, would lead to him giving up and abandoning everything and everyone. I feel like that if you're ever going to begin to make sense of that, it need to be something more, a lot more, and I do mean a lot. And even still, I'm not sure myself and or some others out there would ever really want to accept it. However, really trying to keep an open mind here, in theory, Luke's breaking point could have come about because of what had happened in the past with Mara Jade and perhaps with a child of theirs, and his struggles with attachment or no attachment. Perhaps he starts out by believing in attachments with the new Jedi Order, and then something happens with Mara and their son, and he changes everything. He loses them and gives up everything for the Jedi Order and puts all his faith in Ben Solo, only to see that Ben will forsake it and turn to the dark side, and that causes him to snap. And don't get me wrong here, I'm not saying I will personally ever like what was done with Luke in The Last Jedi, and I know many will say you wouldn't even want to see them try to fix this, that the sequels are garbage and should be retconned, and I certainly get or understand that stance. I've said before, I'm not against a retcon of the sequels using something like The World Between Worlds. I even created a whole 15-part story that did just that. All I'm saying here is I think the right person could create an interesting story using Mara Jade that fits into the new canon and, for some perhaps, could make The Last Jedi Luke more palatable, shall we say. It could even involve Anakin's old lightsaber and be that good story for another time that Maz Kanata talked about in The Force Awakens. That the lightsaber was originally, let's say, found by Mara Jade, and then she went and hunted down Luke and was going to kill him with it, with his father's old lightsaber. But of course, things didn't go as planned and the two eventually fall in love, and she uses the saber until it gets passed down to their son, before being lost in some type of incident where Luke loses them both. And so when Luke sees that saber being handed to him again by Rey at the end of The Force Awakens, he then has the reaction he does at the start of The Last Jedi. He tosses it away. And again, and I stress here, I'm not saying that fixes everything or maybe anything at all, but it would add a much, much needed layer of context to everything that happened in that film to the way Luke was. Because right now, I'm sorry, it doesn't make sense that, as Mark Hamill himself has even said, the most optimistic guy in the galaxy would give up on everything and turn his back on his family and friends. Anyway here, despite George Lucas's dislike of the character and his insistence that Luke would never get married or anything like that, I not only hope we'll see Mara Jade worked into the new canon, but I think she could begin to save it for some people. I think, like I said, the right story could, I don't know about change minds per se, but I think it could start to make sense of The Last Jedi Luke for some people. But even still, we can never get a do-over with that movie, or at least a do-over with the real Mark Hamill in the sequel trilogy with all the original other actors. And for me, that's the real shame of the sequel trilogy we got. We never got a moment with all of them together. We never got a moment to celebrate all that was the original trilogy with these original actors. And that I will always be disappointed by. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about any and all of this. Do you think the Jedi should have no attachments, or do you think they should? Or do you think that's an interesting story at the very least to explore? And what do you think about Mara Jade being introduced in the new canon? Would you like to see it? And how do you think she should be used? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.